Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's program, which is called The Welcome Myth, Immigration and America's Contradictions. My name is Marcia Eli, and on behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library, the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents, and the Center for Brooklyn History, which is where we are, it's my honor to greet you. The United States is in the midst of an urgent and existential immigration crisis, and tonight we're honored to welcome three voices to reflect on this moment, how it may or may not echo other times in our history, and what it says about who we are as a country. Sadly, Nancy Foner, our third planned panelist, sends her regrets. She is busy nursing a case of walking pneumonia. We're sad that she can't join us tonight, and she's sad too. This discussion is the next in our series of Just Conversations. That is a series that we co-present with by the Center for Brooklyn History and Brooklyn.org. Tonight we are also joined by the nonprofit news site Documented, which is devoted to covering New York City's immigrants and the policies that affect their lives. Documented's signature newsletter, Early Arrival, is a must-read for anyone concerned about immigration in New York, and you can sign up for it by going to docu.nyc/earlyarrival. So this is the first of two events presented by CBH, Brooklyn.org, and Documented that explore immigration in the United States. The second one, we're taking a break for the summer, takes place on September 15th and brings together leaders from the International Rescue Committee, the ACLU, and Documented. I hope you'll mark your calendar and look for more information later this summer. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Leanne Stegmeyer, Chief of Staff at Brooklyn.org, to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. First of all, also thank you for the air conditioning. It is such a relief walking in here off the subway tonight. It's always a privilege to work together with the Center for Brooklyn History on this Just Conversations series. I believe this is about the fourth or fifth event that we've done so far, with each conversation designed to bring together community leaders, historians, and big thinkers to dig into injustices impacting Brooklynites and the solutions that we have within our reach. I'm thrilled that tonight's panel includes Hussein Yadaberry, Executive Director of the Muslim Community Network, an organization backed by Brooklyn.org and our donor community since 2021. We are supporting its Muslim women's civic engagement or civic empowerment program, safety trainings, voting rights workshops, voter canvassing, and immigrant rights classes. I imagine they've been quite busy this election season, and it's been really exciting to see. We're also partnering tonight, of course, with Documented, New York City's most valuable nonprofit news site, a longtime grantee of Brooklyn.org as well. Brooklyn.org, if you don't know us well, is a partner and platform for local philanthropy. We are simply neighbors helping neighbors, raising resources to invest millions of dollars annually in local nonprofits that we all rely on, across every issue, from immigration and housing to justice reform, arts and culture, and so on. The attention that we paid towards our local communities has never been more important and more essential. When national solutions seem incredibly distant, local action becomes our most powerful tool for change. Answers are not coming from outside. They are emerging from within our neighborhoods, on our blocks, and through the voices of our neighbors. So I thank you all for being here to listen, but more importantly, for engaging directly with the ideas and solutions that are going to be shared tonight and taking action on them. I also want to invite you to join us at Brooklyn.org. You can follow us on Instagram at BKLYNORG, or sign up for our newsletter at Brooklyn.org to learn more about the countless organizations and leaders working for change in our communities, as well as invites to future events that we produce. I also want to invite you to stay after tonight's program for a reception. We've got plenty of water, but we also have wine and food, where we can keep this conversation going and share more about all of our work that we do for Brooklyn. Thank you.
Okay, so now let me tell you a little bit about our participants tonight and invite them to the stage. Alex Lenikoff is the Executive Dean of the New School for Social Research and University Professor at the New School. Alex has written widely on immigration and refugee law and policy, transnational law, citizenship, race, and constitutional law. Alex was the United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees from 2010 to 2015. He was Dean, Executive Vice President for Law Center Affairs, and a faculty member at Georgetown University Law Center, and served as co-chair of the Immigration Task Force for President Barack Obama's transition team in 2008. From 1994 to 1997, he served as the General Counsel and then Executive Associate Commissioner for Programs at the Immigration and Naturalization Service. He was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2014. Hussein Yatabari is the Executive Director of the Muslim Community Network, MCN, in New York City. Born and raised in the Bronx to Gambian Muslim immigrants, prior to joining MCN, he led organizational growth at Neighborhood United, a nonprofit supporting youth in South Bronx. And he spent several years in educational leadership roles across New York City public charter schools. His work is driven by a passion for justice, inclusion, and empowering historically marginalized communities. And our moderator tonight is Dara Lind. She is a senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, where she works to help the public better understand immigration policy. Before joining the council, she was truly one of the most trusted and respected immigration reporters in the country. First at Vox, where she also co-hosted the policy podcast, The Weeds, and then at ProPublica. Her work has also appeared in the New York Times, the American Prospect, Democracy, Bloomberg Businessweek, and Vanity Fair. It's hard to summarize their bios because there were so many accomplishments that I had to cut out in order to get us to the discussion. So please help me welcome our amazing panel tonight. We're so honored to have you all here.
Evening, folks. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yes, excellent. How are we? Are we still schwitzing? Are we de-schwitzed? Excellent. This is what we like to hear. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm sure that plenty of folks would rather be having some feelings about last night's mayoral election, which even those of us from DC have been following because you guys just have more fun with elections than we do. But thank you for being here and trying to wrap all of our heads around what has been, I think, a really whirlwind several months. We were just talking in the green room about yet another story, about yet another policy that could be coming down the pike. But we're going to try to give you some perspective and some ways of thinking about what's going on that hopefully will help us both look forward and look backward and forward. So I want to start by asking each of the panelists, and Hussein, I guess I'll start with you because you're closer. Can you think about and tell us about a few things that you've seen under the Trump administration over the last few months that have been new in the scope of what the U.S. has typically done, and a few things that haven't been new, and where you've seen those before?
Thank you. Hi, Hussein Yadaberry, Muslim Community Network. And I think, honestly, it's like we were talking in the back earlier, it's the speed and scale at which everything is happening. I think that really felt very different than Trump 1.0. And I think as a community leader going into community, like, people are so much more concerned now than they were then, because like the infrastructure is being set up in order to be like one restrictionist, but then also to remove people. You have the tribal ban, that feels old, but now you have something that's growing in the size of a scope and the amount of countries it's targeting. You have countries across multiple continents, like it's the Muslim ban, but it's also like a Black African ban. So you have so many countries on that list, and then they're adding maybe 36 or 39 more countries they're considering. And it's just like you hear all of these leaks, and they're just to stoke fear, massive amounts of fear. And I think that hasn't changed. People were fearful before, people are fearful now, but it's the amount of scale and how quickly things are going and passing and going in the Trump administration's favor that people feel like there's no stopgaps. There's no Congress that can stop them. People feel like, obviously, SCOTUS is also not doing anything. So people are like, what branch is going to stop him from like going off the rails?
So on the what's old again, we've had times in our history of mass deportations. The Palmer raids in the early 20th century directed at radical immigrants, what was called Operation Wetback, and significant removal of maybe 1 million people, many of them U.S. citizens in the 1950s. So we've had these moments where we think it's time to get rid of all the undocumented folks. I think the other thing that we go through cycles on is vilification of immigrants. So the Trump statement about in Springfield, Illinois, that Haitians were eating pets. Remember this during the campaign, and similar kinds of statements that we're being invaded. That that Los Angeles is a city under invasion by this kind of talk. We've had this many times in our history. The Chinese exclusion laws that were adopted in the late 19th century were based on racist notions of the Chinese. Before that, attacks on the Irish, the Know-Nothing Party of the 1840s and 50s. And then the creation of the national origin quota system in the early 20th century that basically eliminated or significantly cut back on immigration from Eastern Europe and the like. So we've gone through these in that way. That's not new. But there are a number of new things, I think. One is, first, and some of them are just weird, like the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act to send Venezuelans to El Salvador, and this is part of a broader attack on due process. That was just unheard of. The use of this weird provision in the deportation laws about you can deport the Secretary of State can order the deportation of someone if their statements in some way are offensive to the foreign policy of the United States. Immigration law. We never heard of this being used, and that's the provision that was used against Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student. The attack on birthright citizenship, which had been such a rock of our citizenship law since the late 19th century, adopted. 14th Amendment adopted after the Civil War to overcome the Dred Scott case, and then a decision of the Supreme Court in the late 19th century that basically said anybody born here was a citizen. And now Trump wants to get that to the Supreme Court to say, no, if you were born to undocumented or just simply people who don't have green cards in the country, you're not a citizen. So these are extreme measures that go beyond things that I've seen in my lifetime in this business.
I want to, and this is like a massive abuse of moderator's prerogative, but because Nancy isn't here, I'm like gonna use one moment of panelism. I want to talk about mass deportation because I think that when we say that there have been mass deportations in the past, that people assume that that deportation was the same thing then that it was now. And like, it wasn't, right? Like, the Eisenhower operations, yeah, it's 1 million people, although there's evidence that like that's, inflated because they were counting people who just picked up and left. But we also know from the record that a lot of those remember at that time, there were no restrictions on legal immigration in the Western Hemisphere. So a lot of these people were getting deported, and then literally at the border, their employer would hand them work papers, and then they would come back and they would be legal workers.
There were no numerical limitations. There were other limitations.
Right. But like, it's, whereas now deportation is, you are barred for a certain amount of time from ever returning to the United States legally. It's for people because people aren't because a lot of people are not, from Mexico. It's a further deportation flight, and it's a much more expensive and difficult, effort to get here. And also, I think the other thing is, and I kind of want to ask each of you how you think this plays into it. What we're seeing so much is that this administration is going after people who are already in the system. Either they, had some kind of temporary protections that the administration is getting rid of, or they already have immigration court cases. And that seems to me to be very different from an effort that is, these people are totally off the books and we're going to find them. And I would love to know how you think that kind of, fits into, because Alex, if you're saying that mass deportations are typical, but the due process attacks are not, it seems like they're kind of melding the two together, right? And Hussein, I would love to hear, what does that mean for people who have, ICE check-ins or who are considering whether they're going to renew their work permits?
Yeah, I think families are just scared. We have been at Foley Square multiple times. We're part of the New York Immigration Coalition in order to hold rallies and protest. We went there the day they arrested Brad Lander, our comptroller, for standing up and asking, where is your warrant? Can you produce a warrant? And I think that's just going back to the attack on due process that you're talking about. It's we don't feel like we need to show you a warrant. A duly elected official of New York City. So people within our community, they're coming to us and they're saying, you're conducting these immigrant rights workshops. And for the past decade that MCN has been doing immigrant rights workshops, it's always worked out mostly in the community's favor. I know the laws, I know what to say if ICE ever comes to my door and they come to my home. I know to go to my check-ins because if I follow these specific steps, then there is an opportunity for my papers to get legitimized. But now it's, if I go in, will I come out? You hear stories of people's children going in to an ICE check-in. They have high school the next day and they go in for a check-in and they never come out. You have mothers going in for check-ins, fathers going in for their check-ins, and they don't know if they're gonna go back home to see their kids. So they have two options. It's either I go to check-in and I play my odds, or I stay home. But then when you stay home, it's okay, now we are gonna produce a warrant because you didn't come to your check-in. So you have a catch-22. And it's going to be really difficult for people to believe in systems, even nonprofits, outside of, can you produce legal representation for me now? Because outside of that, there's no amount of education that's really helpful to me in this moment in time. You can educate me about immigration laws, but if the government doesn't follow the immigration laws, then it's what other recourse do I actually have? So it's that side of things, the people facing side of the work that's truly really, really difficult. You're looking at someone in their face and you're telling them, I don't actually have an answer for you. And that wasn't the same 2 years ago. That wasn't the same 4 years ago. People had recourse besides saying get a lawyer and hoping they don't come pick you up and hoping they actually follow the rules and allow you a day in court if you ever get apprehended. But it's just will you get a day in court? No one knows. And it's just all up in the air, and it just upended people's lives, and people just don't know anything. So families can't even plan. Families don't know what to do. Can I go outside with my children? Can I leave the state? If I go to the airport, will I be asked further questions about my status, even though I may have my real ID because I'm a foreign national? So it just becomes difficult to just move. There was one mom that was telling us, she's from Gambia. She's I think I'm depressed right now. She's there's weeks where I don't come out my house for 3 to 4 days, and it's just because of fear. She's I'm seeing things happening around in other states, and I was oh, that'll never happen in New York. She thought New York was a reprieve. And then I started coming into New York. I started coming into 26 Federal Plaza, and she's I just don't want to move. I wake up in bed and I just want to go back to sleep and hope there's someone new, and there's someone that has empathy, and there's someone that has compassion that's in a leadership position. And she's I wake up, I look at the news, and there's just something new. And now Gambia is being considered as one of the countries that should be under Muslim travel ban, and it's just like, I don't know what to do. So I'm removed from my family. Family cannot come visit me. Like, I have a life here with my children. I can't go visit them. So I'm in this place where I just don't want to do anything. She stopped working. She's like, I don't want to go to work and get picked up if they do a raid at my workplace, because she's a home healthcare worker, and many immigrants are in the home healthcare industry taking care of seniors in this community. And she's like, I'm not going to work. We're relying on my husband's income because he has a citizenship, and I don't know what to do. And I told her, I don't know what to do either.
Yeah, it's the uncertainty that's so disconcerting. It's just a mild word. Dara, I want to think about your question, though, in different categories. So, so sort of the old rules have been violated in a way, the way the system used to work. But the system was some of the old rules didn't make much sense. So, first of all, the focus on criminal aliens, that's the phrase that's used. That was Obama, it was every Democrat talked about, if we have to remove anybody, we're going to go to the prisons and the jails and take people out of, committed serious crimes, they're deportable and they're going to be gone. And that's what Trump said he was doing, right? But they're not going to get 1 million people that way. So then they redefined what criminal meant by saying anybody who crossed the border illegally is criminal because that's a misdemeanor to cross the border illegal. So they could expand the definition to include illegal entrance, undocumented entrance. The other category that they focused on is, it's a weird part of our system. There are 1 million people, more than 1 million people in the country who have final orders of deportation, who have not left the country. That is, that they've gone through all the procedures that are provided. They've had due process, and they got an order to leave the country. And either their stay was tolerated because they had kids in school or a medical issue, or another, maybe they married a U.S. citizen and later could adjust their status, some of them. But many of them are simply deportable, and Trump said we're going to go after those folks as well, which many Americans may actually agree with. If you've actually gone through the whole process, it's time to go home if you can't prove it. But those people are hard to find, and you see it takes 5 or 6 ICE agents to pick one person up, right? And so you can't get to 1 million that way either. And this 1 million number is kind of this crucial number. So then you start going into the neighborhoods. And what the Trump folks have said as well, if we had more cooperation from the local governments about letting us go to their jails, we wouldn't have to go into the neighborhoods. This is what Homan says. But they start going to workplaces because that's where undocumented folks are. So we're way beyond what the initial idea of removals was. And we're into the situation that Hussein's described where people who've been, the average length of time that an undocumented person has lived in the country is more than a decade. And many of them are in mixed families of U.S. citizens and married to green cards or have kids born here who are citizens. And suddenly you have ICE, because they have this crazy number that they want to reach of 1 million, which is an arbitrary number, disturbing these communities, spreading the kind of terror in these communities that Hussein is describing. And that's where you get to this change in rules, because it used to be if you showed up for your check-in with ICE, if you worked and didn't commit a crime, if you were working in an industry. Remember during the COVID, there were these essential workers in the fields in California who were undocumented but essential at the same time, right? We had this weird kind of category. Those rules have changed now, and everybody's up for grabs. And the other thing they've done, the big change, is Biden had allowed a lot of groups of folks into the country as a way to. The Biden theory was we can stop undocumented migration by being a little tougher on the border, but also by letting other people in through a program of what was called parole, that you could be paroled into the country. Your temporary stay in the country would be tolerated, and that was extended to people from Cuba, Venezuela, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Haiti. And then another several hundred thousand, I think it was almost 100,000 Afghan folks were let in, not through the refugee system, but through a parole program as well. So there were hundreds of thousands of people that came into the country legally. They were permitted to be here. And Trump has now tried to end all those programs, and again, now declares all these people undocumented, illegally here. So he's expanded the category of kind of undocumented, illegal folks through his own measures. And I think that's not how we think about undocumented. We think of undocumented people who came without papers. And actually, there are many of these people who have been following the law now being declared undocumented. So in that way, I think it is quite different. So there are different groups of folks we need to think about as we think about this.
Yeah, I really want to dig in on this kind of disconnect between the way that we expect the immigration system to work and the reality, because that is, I think that what you guys are expressing is something that's become particularly acute over the last few months, but the kind of, simplified idea that there is a line to get into, and as long as you come here and do the right thing, you'll get legal status, or, if you come here and present yourself, the judge will look into your heart and see that you're a good person, that kind of thing. You both see this belief among American citizens who have never had to learn anything about the immigration system, and in people who are going through it because they kind of have to believe that there's, light at the end of the tunnel for them. But in some ways, that's never really been the way that the system has worked. So, how do you, what do you think are some things that have kind of come to light about how the system has always worked that people in this kind of, hearts and flowers, America is the Statue of Liberty, and of course we welcome people, might have missed?
I'm a child of two immigrants from the country of Gambia, so I'm in that middle. I'm in the middle of American citizens who have no idea about the immigration system besides what I see on TV. But I'm not in this space where I am actively looking for immigration status in America. I watched my parents go through it. I sat in immigration court at 26 Federal Plaza and was asked by a judge about the hardship that I would feel as an 8-year-old child if my parents were deported. So you have this notion for a lot of people that's idealistic, that the country is all welcoming. And truly, the country did welcome in my parents on asylum. But going through that process to the end goal of becoming a permanent resident, that's a decades-long process. My dad came here in 1987. My mom came here in 1991. And I was born in 1992. They made a life for themselves. My younger brother was born 4 years later. But no one received any status until 2003. So it was just kind of moseying in the system of being in this weird middle ground where I have temporary workers authorization. I have a social security number I'm paying into the system. But my dad is like, I have more legal standing in my case. Your mom actually, she has a order of removal on her head, and we don't know if it'll ever be lifted. So you're just kind of going through school, and you're going through just childhood, knowing that someone may come and pick up my parents one day, and you will go stay with this aunt if that does happen, and she'll be like the matriarch of the family, but your dad will get to stay here, and then we'll figure it out from there, because we can't lose his income, and we all go back to Gambia. And well, you don't really know Gambia. You've been on vacation, but you would have to uproot your whole life. So you never really feel planted. You never really feel like you have the ability to really spread your roots until after I no longer have that off my head in 2003, and it's there is some status, and it's there is some surety that my parents will be here and I don't have to worry about that. There's going to be a bunch of things to worry about. We live in New York City, the most expensive city, but I won't have to worry about that. And you have hundreds of thousands of students within our public education system in the city that are going through that in a different way, where your parents are actively being sought. And your parents, we have parents within the Muslim community network that are changing their phone numbers because they're like, yeah, I know with technology now, they might be able to track me. They have all of this information when I gave it to them at immigration. So will they track my phone? So now people's paranoia is going into overdrive. Should we move? I'm being asked. I'm I don't want to advise you to move or not to move, but it's like, well, they have my address. Well, they come to this address. I think I'm going to move. So people are just, and I'm like, you should talk to a lawyer. But it's just like, people are just going kind of driving themselves crazy thinking about, how do I mitigate this and still be able to take care of my family? How do I take care of my children? How do I provide for my family back home? If I don't know the place where I lay my head, if there'll be a knock at the door and that's it, and my life will be uprooted. And that's extremely scary. And just even as a citizen of immigrant parents, the fact that you're hearing cases of being profiled by police. As a black man, I'm profiled by police, but as a child of immigrants as well, is it like, are you a U.S. citizen? Can you provide documentation? And you're seeing it happening in our city, but you see it happening in a lot of red states in more frequency, where you see a lot of people of Latinx descent and they're being pulled over at checkpoints in the road, and they have to prove they're a citizen to pass. And you're citizens. And it was like, oh, well, maybe U.S. citizens that have green card, well, U.S. citizens that were naturalized, but you have U.S. citizens that were born here, they just have darker features, and that's a good reason to probably stop them and check. We might catch somebody on our list. So you don't feel comfortable within your own city, your state, your nation, and it's like, truly you hold on to these ideals of America, that America is this land that is welcoming, but you have very restrictionist policies that are being instituted right now that don't make it feel like it's home.
So two ideas on your question. First of all, everything Hussein has described about the process, most Americans have no idea about immigration court, about why you would be asked about hardship. It's just, all that is beyond all of us, except experts, about how the system works. We understand the system at a much sort of higher level, I wouldn't say higher, more abstract level. But I think what we've discovered about the system is how cruel it can be. People have always talked about deportation as being a serious thing when people are sent home and people are denied their right to file for asylum. People can understand that, but I think I mean people who've been in this business a long time didn't understand the kind of actions that might be permissible under existing law in terms of sending people home or picking them up, or the kinds of raids, or even, Brad Lander saying, where's your warrant? They didn't need a warrant to arrest the fellow. There isn't a requirement of a judicial warrant in that situation, or any kind of warrant, even an ICE warrant. So I think a lot of the things we think would make sense in a system that's fair and full of due process and looks after people's rights, we've discovered it doesn't really exist in the immigration system. You can have ICE folks go into Los Angeles surrounded by the National Guard and the Marines as they patrol the neighborhood, and we have a Ninth Circuit decision saying that that's probably going to be okay, right? Who knew that? Who knew that was possible? So I think that we've discovered the hidden potential for cruelty in our immigration system, which we hadn't exercised before.
I'm reminded of what Mahmoud Khalil said last week when he got released from detention in Louisiana before returning to New York, that once he stepped through the door of the detention center, he felt like he was seeing the reverse side of America, where a lot of the ideals that people took for granted just didn't exist at all. And that, it seems like that's kind of like, we've stepped through the looking glass, and seen that a lot of this stuff, that there were untapped levels of cruelty that we hadn't necessarily anticipated. I want to talk a little bit, Hussein, you mentioned in passing this, people in red states who are more subject to getting pulled over and getting asked to prove that they're citizens. And that really speaks to this other idea of America, that it's this very, that it's for people who can trace their ancestors back, 100 years, but certainly not 500 years. But, that it's this very restrictionist idea of identity that then ends up perpetuating itself, right? Because you're making people like you, people who are, visibly non-white but are born in the US, feel that their citizenship is conditional. And I want to come back to, you mentioned that your community members had assumed that it would happen in other places and not in New York. And so are you seeing that kind of other idea of America gaining momentum or people, becoming more aware of it or even being willing to espouse it themselves? Even in places like New York, which generally have been more welcoming?
Yeah, I think 1,000%. Immigrant communities like hold America up to like a gold standard. You can go back in history and talk about colonialism and all of these different things and how they fractured a lot of these countries that a lot of these immigrants come from. But they still hold it up to the standard where this is the place I'm going to be able to come and make my dreams happen. And many immigrants in New York City is like that word sanctuary. Everyone comes for sanctuary. And this city, it's actually labeled a sanctuary city. So this is the safest place in America that I can be, where I can remove myself from these things that I know exist. But as an immigrant New Yorker or as a first-gen immigrant New Yorker, it's just like you kind of like even shut your brain down to like the depravity that can happen when it comes to the immigration system and criminalizing you and your community and your family. But people just feel criminalized now. It's the carceral system. I think when you talk about Mahmoud Khalil, it's like when you go inside the carceral system, immigrant or not, it takes away like your dignity. So when you're in a limbo where I'm not in the carceral system of an ICE detention center, but I'm in my home, my city then kind of becomes its own jail cell in a way, where it's like New York City isn't completely safe for me if I'm an undocumented immigrant or if I'm on a list, but this is the safest place and a mad place that I can be in. I even said red state, but I can go to a red district. I can go over and just drive over into Long Island, where Nassau County Police are allowed to work with ICE and collaborate with ICE in Nassau and Suffolk County. So I don't even need to like go to another state. I just need to go from Jamaica, Queens over into Lakeshore, and that's what it is. Lakeview, I mean, but like you literally just have to get under LIRR and it's completely different rules. And I think when you were talking about all these rules, it's just a matter of interpretation. Rules are being interpreted in every which way, depending on who's in power. I mean, like you were talking about, like during different administrations in the past, the interpretation was different. And this administration is saying, we're going to bring back rules from 1898 or whatever year, and we think this applies to now in 2025. And we're going to find any line or parse through any language in the hundreds of years of United States history and put that together in order to move our agenda. So there is no sense of safety, there is no sense of security if you're an immigrant, but it's just a matter that you're criminalized and your dignity is completely stripped from you and you're the topic of the conversation, unless you work in an industry that has massive lobby groups like agriculture and hospitality, and it's like, no, keep those immigrants because we still need laborers, but everyone else can pretty much go.
I mean, like that lasted, you're talking about there was an announced pause on a Friday night on doing raids in those sectors, and then by the next Tuesday, they'd reversed it. So
you have a country ran on Truth Social, so it's just like, you just wake up and there's 2 a.m. Truth Social and tweets that come out and you're like, I guess this is now American policy. I was asleep, but this is a new policy that we have to go with until there's a new legal case in court.
So if New York has become unsafe, as it has at 26 Federal Plaza, it's not New York that's made itself unsafe. It's because the federal government has moved into New York and taken these kinds of actions that we haven't seen before, and Trump has said that. I mean, he said we're going to go to the blue cities, right? The asylum cities. Isn't it strange this has happened in California and New York and Chicago maybe next, but it hasn't happened in Florida or Texas, which have hundreds of millions of undocumented immigrants between them. So we know what's happening here. It's not surprising. The one thing I want to think about, based on what Mahmoud Khalil said about going into detention and seeing, the other side of America, which of course we incarcerate more people than any other country. So many people have seen that world, but if you're a Columbia student, you're probably haven't seen that world. There's something about saying, the actions the administration now are taking, they're not us. That's not America. It is America. I mean, that's what immigration history shows, is we have had these moments repeatedly where we have done really terrible things that we later then regret. We've had race. The first naturalization law that was passed in 1790 in this country said you could naturalize in the United States if you were a white person only. You had to be, it was in our first naturalization law. The Dred Scott case held that black people, but free black people were not citizens of the United States. The Chinese exclusion laws, and then later the agreement with the gentleman's agreement with Japan, ended immigration from China and Japan. This is us, unfortunately, and what we have to do is fight it. We just have to keep fighting it at every moment. It's not new.
I promise we'll get to the fighting part. But before I give anyone any cause for hope, I want to take us just a little bit darker. Because what struck me with what you just said, Alex, is both Dred Scott and the Chinese Exclusion Act were cases where there was a movement backwards in terms of stripping rights from people who had them. And certainly in the case of the Chinese Exclusion Act, in response to nativist violence and pogroms, really, in California in the case of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so how worried, and this is not an answerable question, and I'm sorry, but how worried are you? How worried do you think we should be that what we're seeing is the turning point in something, that it really is a permanent move toward more restrictionist immigration policy?
I don't know. I think we go through cycles on this, and I think the No King's Day protest showed that. I think the protests in Los Angeles showed that. And I think if ICE comes into the neighborhoods of New York or Chicago, God help them. I mean, there'll be massive demonstrations in this city. And Trump may want that so we can call out the National Guard again, but I think we'll get back to some kind of equilibrium as we always had. The problem is, before you get there are a lot of people who are hurt. Yeah. What Trump has been able to do is spread the kind of terror in the communities that Hussein has been describing here. And I think here's why. I think this is maybe they haven't figured this out yet, but I think this is what they'll do at the end of the year. When they haven't reached their 1 million deportations, they'll say, but 200,000 or 300,000 people left the country because we made things so terrible for them, they self-deported. And they'll add that to their numbers to get to their 1 million. I mean, this idea of self-deportation has been in the Republican lexicon for what, 2 decades, Dara? Maybe a decade, 2,
See,
it's gone.
the initial report comes out in 2006, so yeah.
And the idea was you're going to make life so miserable for immigrants, take away benefits, don't let them change their status, whatever, or now terrorize the communities, that they'll simply leave the country, which is much cheaper for the government than having to pick them up and put them in detention and deport, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of policy is that? I mean, I go back to my cruelty point.
Yeah, no, I think I would just echo what you're saying. When it comes to immigration policy in that sense, I think it does definitely swing on the pendulum. And we are at a massive extreme right now, and it will eventually swing back. I have to believe that. I have to have faith in that it'll swing back. But so many lives are damaged and destroyed in that process of it happening. so many people just kind of like feel like in that moment in time they want to remove themselves from the identity even because you're in this land that's supposed to accept you for who you are and you really can't be that. So it's just a tough, really tough dilemma right now. I think people are going to be in massive fear for a very long time. I think there's going to be a lot of trauma behind it even after this moment is over. I think also, like, I'm starting to see the No Kings protest, but also just even in politics, we look at the election just from yesterday and you see communities speaking out through their vote that when we talk about even New York City, that yes, the federal government is doing it, but we have an executive in New York City and our mayor who he dances the line and the rhetoric says, like, I do want to help the Trump administration and ICE. So maybe this city isn't as safe as what you once thought in a more progressive sanctuary city where there is conversation about should we still be a sanctuary city. So it's extremely difficult to even feel safe at the local level when that kind of rhetoric is being spewed. You have cities like Boston where the mayor is standing firm in her city and the dignity of immigrants. But New York, it's a toss-up, and November, there is still some fear that you may have a new mayor in January that will work to fight for the rights of all immigrants, and that may not be the case if someone else is in that mayoral seat or the same person is in mayoral seat. It may be, I want to continue and expand, and now I feel like this word that's coming up a lot, the mandate in order to push this. Because if I got voted into office, that means the people that elected me in, or they want the worst of my policies.
So I really want to kind of squarely talk about what, Hussein, you've been alluding to for this, or, talking about for this entire conversation, which is the chilling effect, right? The fear that people, even those who have not themselves been in contact with immigration enforcement, have in terms of like going about their daily lives, which is really, that seems to me to be like the precursor to the self-deportation goal, right? Like you get people to be miserable enough and seeing no hope enough, and they're going to pick up and leave. But even without that, if you have, in places where there have been raids, you will have massive, like you'll see like a massive drop in kids going to school. We saw that in Denver after the raids in the first week of the administration, like a 25% drop in school attendance. You have parents who won't go, who won't leave their homes, won't go to work. You have like empty storefronts and markets. And that is also in its way giving the restrictionists what they want, right? Because there are no longer thriving communities. So, and I know that you said it that, earlier in this conversation that you no longer have great answers for what people can do and how they can feel confident. But like at the same time, there does have to be some answer that isn't, yes, you should be hiding in your home all day. So how can we square the arbitrariness and the like fact that they are successfully pursuing a policy that is terrorizing people without allowing people to get so terrorized that they become immobile?
So I think at most CBOs at MCN, I think, is trying to get more support around legal representation for immigrants and help to pass policies that's going to help provide legal representations for immigrants. So with New York Immigration Coalition, we've been up in Albany fighting for certain bills and certain amounts of funding that will protect immigrant New Yorkers in New York. And I just think every state needs to really do that. There's one called the Access to Representation Act. Just like in the criminal justice system, the Access to Representation Act, the ARA, would have the state fund representation for all immigrants in New York State, regardless of like their status, so they can have representation in immigration court. About 176,000 immigrants each year in immigration court in New York State alone go without a lawyer. And obviously the financial barrier of getting legal assistance, it's extremely high in a lot of cases. So some community members decide to go in themselves and self-represent. And I think community advocates also have to push for funding when it comes to CBOs that provide legal representation. I think we've been also pushing the New York for All Act to ensure that local law enforcement is not working with ICE. We've taken to the street with coalitions in order to also make sure we're spreading awareness and making sure our voices are heard. We're telling community members to just have defense, like have their defense plan well, connect with a lawyer so you can make a safety plan with your family, have a plan with your family in the cases and unfortunate cases that you get deported, but to continue to think about different ways you can support your own family, different ways you can protect yourself while this gets figured out, and then also push for candidates and push for people to go out and vote. We have immigrant members that come to Albany with us that are in a weird gray area, but they're like, I'm not going to stop coming. I know like this may be dangerous to even go into the halls of government to go advocate, but if no one comes and raises our voices, we have one woman, Aminata, she's like, I pay taxes in this country too. I don't care. I'm going to go. And if they take me and they send me back home, I'll make sure my voice is heard. And it takes a lot of storytelling. It's showing those stories. It's people hearing about those stories. It's people seeing those people and connecting with those people to also like really shift minds around who should be in power, what policies should be in place to get people to actually rethink, are we on the right course that are really this pro-restrictionist immigration agenda?
I mean, I feel like this ends up running into a paradox that I think all of us kind of have to deal with, which is that on the one hand, we've been saying that the law can't be trusted anymore. And on the other hand, the only answer we can give people is, well, we have to make sure that, you know, we don't know that the courts can go our way anymore. They're ignoring the law, but also you have to have a lawyer, you know? Like, we have to have, there's a certain arbitrariness in enforcement, but also we have to have better policies. And like, I personally don't know. I mean, I personally have a lot of faith in systems, so it's not that hard for me, but I don't know how I can really be out there and like, Alex is someone who's worked with a lot of systems. Like, how can, and frankly, international law has this problem too, right? Like, how can you give something enough power to restrain governments that would otherwise be abusing it if that requires them to submit to the system to begin with and they're acting unaccountably?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. The courts have been pretty good so far in this. I mean, if you think about the range of cases, the number of times they've stopped the administration, whether it's the Alien Enemies Act or telling Harvard they can't admit foreign students, or a number, almost, if you think about it, almost every Trump policy that's gotten to court has been stopped. Not all of them, but most of them have. And the Supreme Court has issued 2 or 3 opinions against the administration and in favor of due process, which I don't think a lot of people expected. So, I mean, and then, the administration does say, these are radical, crazy judges, and some of whom were appointed by Trump. But so far the judiciary has held, let me put it that way. The birthright citizen cases, there, 6 or 7 court cases saying that what Trump tried to do is patently unconstitutional on birthright citizenship. So I think we're okay on the courts so far, and even our Supreme Court seems to think that Trump is overreached. Now, there still is lots of discretion and things that we're not going to be able to stop because they're actually permitted by law, or permitted by the Constitution, because some of limits are less when it comes to immigration in other places. But on the First Amendment, we're likely to see the court that struck down the provision that Mahmoud Khalil was arrested under. A court said that's unconstitutional to restrict his free speech rights. So I mean, I think, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to have to defend the possibility of courts here. But so far, the courts have held, and we'll have to see that. But look, I mean, if you want to think about turning the tide or resisting here, it's got to be courts. It's got to be protests. We've already got the protests. We've seen that, and it's got to be elections. Yeah. It's got to be like the election last night. I mean, ultimately, Biden came in. He took all the Trump stuff out and put his stuff in. Trump came in. He took all the Biden stuff out. It's all executive orders. We haven't had major immigration legislation for a generation. It's all done by regulation. So changing the federal government here is going to, the Democrats will take all this stuff away again. Again, it doesn't mean people haven't been harmed in the meantime. But so elections are gonna really matter. And then ultimately, I'm thinking about your comment, Hussein, about the exception for the agricultural workers and the like. Trump just gave the game away that he doesn't really have any policy views here at all, right? I mean, he gets a call from a farmer saying, I can't, harvest my crops, and he says, "Oh my God, how could we can't be deporting those people?" So there's obviously no principle here, but no one's surprised to hear that about the president. But I think it provides a real opening on legislation. This is the fourth thing I would point to if Democrats ever come back in. I think it's really time now to start talking about legalization, which I know seems like we're fighting, deportations, we're fighting for how can we start talking? I think you start talking now and you say Donald Trump gave the game away because he admitted that there are groups of people who shouldn't be removed. And we should be talking now about a legalization program for long-term undocumented people at the same time that we're resisting the overreach of the Trump administration. It'll take some years and it'll take some elections, but it's really time. That's the solution. You don't need mass deportation for 10 million people. You need to give them legal status because they've been here for so long and they have families. And I think we need to start. I think we've been scared to talk about that, right? Because it seems where the country's in the mood if we want to remove everybody. And I think that's the positive case we've got to start pressing.
Yeah, because I think when you have this amount of oppression, you have to move towards liberation. You can't move towards a middle ground of the status quo that was there before that. And the storytelling is really the key piece to demystifying and removing the fear from a lot of immigrant communities. I think it's pointing to cases like Mahmoud Khalil's and Abrego Garcia's, even though they're not completely out of the fire. It's pointing to that. When you have good legal representation, when you have good advocates that really push your case up the ladder and to national attention, there'll be enough noise on unlawful practices that there may be a pathway for you to find your way back home. And Mahmoud Khalil had that faith inside the detention center when his wife gave birth, and they took him away from his hallway uptown that day and took him, and no one found out where he was for 72 hours until they found out he was in Louisiana about to be going back home. So it's telling people that we have to work the system, but we have to take all parts of civic engagement. It's protecting yourself through having legal representation, but making sure that your family members that can vote, that they do vote, continuing to advocate to your communities. But also, one thing we've been telling immigrant communities is we don't know we can't tell you about the future. When I say I don't know to someone, it's I can't predict the future for you, and I can't give you all of this advice, but what I can tell you is if you continue to work the system in that way, and you continue to follow those steps, there is a community here, there is coalition that is fighting on your behalf. And if we don't have the answers, we can always refer you and connect you with someone who can get you more answers or get you some of the protection you're seeking.
I just want to pick up on something you said there, Hussein. So about these disappearances where people are picked up and they're somehow in another state and no one knows where they are. So before the Civil War, the northern states adopted what were called personal liberty laws, and they were put in place to stop kidnapping because slave catchers would come north and take slaves back without any kind of process. And under the fugitive slave laws of the United States, they were permissible, et cetera, et cetera. And often would take free blacks back who were not, and this is 12 Years a Slave, I guess was the movie was based on this idea. So the northern states said, were passed state laws. This goes to your point about how states can intervene here, saying it's a crime to kidnap someone from this. So I was wondering, suppose, crazy idea, suppose the asylum states, the blue states, started passing personal liberty laws saying it's a violation of state law to remove someone from this state to another state forcibly without giving them a hearing about why they're being removed. Now, ICE would say that violates federal law, but let's take that case to court, right? Wouldn't that be kind of cool? What do you think, Dara?
I love that we're now, we've now got both a Civil War analogy and a meaty policy proposal that's just been dropped, and I have to pivot to audience Q&A. So everybody gets to ask Alex some follow-up questions about that.
When it comes to cannabis, they pass state laws in multiple states, but it also goes against federal law. So, I mean, it happens.
But I don't know how exactly, I have gathered that there will be a microphone and it will be passed to you once you're called on. So I'm going to start in the back. I think that's it. Yes, no. Please use the mic.
So I'm curious what you all have to say about the precedent that we're seeing regarding this Trump card and how graft and cash is being used or potentially being used as a tool for immigration. Have we ever seen this kind of thing before?
So has anyone here heard of an EB-5? No. So the short answer is that yes, actually, there is something called an investor visa, which says that certain people who agree to invest $500,000 in a U.S.-based business that will create U.S.-based jobs, and you have to jump through a bunch of hoops to demonstrate it's a legitimate business, maybe not enough hoops, but a bunch of them, that you then get a visa that extends to a green card. So the Trump card is a version of that, frankly, or that's the extent, that's the idea that we've been given. It's not like they've bothered to publish a policy proposal on this. They're already working on a website. There are questions about, they're already working on forms, but there isn't anything that you could do if the form got submitted because Congress needs to approve legal immigration changes. So it is, I think that there are lots of questions about how the EB-5 program has always been run. It was actually a controversy under the Obama administration. And there have been kind of little bits of scandals here and there. So it's not once you introduce money into the equation, corruption is always a question. And I'm not saying that the Trump card, if it were to, be implemented, would necessarily go by any kind of by the books or try to be above ground. But yeah, this is one of those things where people don't know, man.
And he's going to get 20% of the tag.
And there's a Trump phone now. There's a Trump phone coming out soon, so he says.
Yeah, go. You can just, it's much easier if you just pick people.
So you've touched on a little bit about possible congressional legislation, and there was a lot of talk a while back when the Congress almost tried to pass a bill. And I'm just curious, if that bill had been passed, would that have had any provisions that you think would have improved our current immigration issues? Nothing. I know I'm not talking about deportation or Trump or any of that, but would any of those provisions have helped us with some of the big immigration issues that we have right now?
Can you clarify which bill you're talking about? Is that the one?
I cannot.
The Biden bill.
Yes.
That Trump was for and then against.
That Trump told
Oh,
the
no, the
Republicans
2024
not
one.
to vote for.
The one from last year. Yeah. Sorry, you said Biden bill, and I was thinking the one they introduced in the first week and then dropped.
No, the bill that Trump told the Republicans not to vote for, that was a bipartisan bill, that's the one. I don't know what it was called.
That's really
It was a pretty tough enforcement bill. I don't remember. There There may have been some provisions that went the other way. I just don't remember them at this point, quite frankly. The one bill that's been around for years, and 95% of, I mean, literally 95% of Americans would approve, is the Dreamer bill to give DACA kids, now adults, because they've been in the system, give them a permanent status. And we can't even get that through Congress. So it's really hard to imagine any kind of legislation getting through at all. At least that would improve the system, other than a tougher deportation law, which is what the Biden bill pretty much was, as I recall it.
Yeah, I mean, this really gets to the heart of your question, because it was being played up by everyone who worked on it as mostly an enforcement bill, but it did actually have, it did have DREAM included, and it also had legalization for Afghan allies, which would have helped people who are now at risk of having their parole stripped. And it's a reflection of, just how hard it is to pass legislation, but also just how fraught this issue is, that a lot of groups in DC were extremely torn. Like, even groups that were founded to help Afghans who had been supportive of the US effort in Afghanistan and who had since had to flee, like, they were really torn on whether to support the bill, and some of them ended up siding against it, because even though it would have legalized a lot of people, or a lot of the people who they in particular were trying to help, they couldn't get on board with it because it would have added more restrictions to asylum going forward. Now, the thing now is that between changes that Biden made after that bill and changes that Trump made, the worst parts of it from the asylum perspective have already gone into effect. And there haven't been any of the mitigating, there hasn't been any legalization, or there haven't been any changes to the asylum system that would actually benefit asylum seekers. But so it's kind of hard to say whether it would have fixed these problems, because you would still have an administration coming in that would be responsible for implementing some of this legalization. And very few people know this. Trump actually is the last president to sign a legalization bill. In the first term, there was a program for Liberians, for a very limited number of Liberians, that slipped in 2019 in a must-pass bill. And then they had to implement it in 2020. And around the last quarter of 2020, right before eligibility closed, lawyers and community groups were like, why has no one heard back about their application yet? Like, why am I suddenly being told that I have to have a passport when everybody knows that there's no way to get a passport from the government of Liberia, that kind of thing. And so there really are questions about whether an administration can act in good faith. Sorry for taking up all the answers. I just know things.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on the episode of the agriculture and hospitality sector, which, exposed, as you say, that there's no, at least for Trump, there's no true policy behind it. But is there any way to activate in a positive, useful way the industries that do depend so much on undocumented immigrants? I mean, it's unbelievable that but typical that all of the burden has fallen on individuals and none of it on the companies that have hired them and profited from their work. But do any of the three of you see any strategy, any possible way of activating those industries?
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this, some of which you're going to have to track me down at the reception and ask me about, because some of them are not very professional. But what I will say is that we've seen this in some places. Maine actually got a lot of attention last year because they had small businesses that were standing up saying, we can't hire people, and there are people in our communities who are qualified who want jobs but can't get hired because they can't get work permits. And so there has been some advocacy, and there have been some places where businesses are standing up. It hasn't percolated up to the industry-wide level in a public way. And this gets into, I think, much bigger questions about when people who are very invested in the status quo have any interest in attracting any negative attention, and when they're just happy to get, the things that go well for them, they're happy to get, and the things that go badly for them, they aren't willing to risk anything to make better.
Sure. Oh, thank you so much. Going back to the early part of the conversation and how this moment is categorically different in certain respects, the question I have we ever seen historically people being deported to countries that they're not from?
Yeah, Alex, I assume you can probably take this from a comparative perspective.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about this. I mean, so people have been deported over the southwest border, Latin Americans, to Mexico, if Mexico accepts them. That's the difficulty, is getting the third country to accept, which now apparently we're just bribing people. We're just paying them a lot of money to take it. But I can't, other than that, I can't think of other examples. It's not impermissible under the law, because the deportation law says you'll go home to your home country or some other country you select, or some other country. There's a whole list of, but the problem with these removals to third countries, from my perspective, is you don't know whether the conditions they're being moved into. So there could be human rights violations. You have a right under the Convention Against Torture to make a claim, and so that's what the judge was saying, is you've got to give these people some chance to show that they won't be harmed if they're returned. But under our laws, sending them to a third country is not automatically a violation of U.S. deportation law. But I can't think, it probably exists, I just can't, other than the south of the border, I can't think of other examples, unless you guys can.
No, I can't think of any examples. I just had a thought about the previous question, and just like how the labor movement has just moved a lot of things in this country in the past, and like somehow bringing labor movements together in order to talk up for immigrant rights, because immigrants do become the new citizens in this country that do take in a lot of these labor forces. I think the little unions that exist, I think, like, are really kind of showcasing how, like, they have huge immigrant populations within their ranks. And I think just trying to figure out how they can coordinate and strategize in order, because like right now it's just like, I guess, sector by sector, like things that the Trump administration is thinking about making exceptions for. But I even thought about like the very beginning, before like the administration really started, and like all the H-1B conversation around the tech sector. And it just like, the tech sector relies on this specific group of immigrants, so they want carve-outs for their group of immigrants. So it's just thinking about how to way to connect all of these different corporations and labor movements, because America does move on immigrant labor in all sectors, from top to bottom.
I mean, this would have to be part of a legalization. If we got a legalization strategy going, it would involve the corporations that need it. It would involve the labor unions where it makes sense, and you'd have to build that kind of coalition to push for it. But that's what I'd love to get this conversation
in 2013,
going.
when we finally got a business, remember in 2013 when business and labor actually like hit a deal that both of them liked?
Thank you. Thank you for all of you for speaking. I have a question that relates to allyship and what we can do to get those people out of their home where they're, shivering in fear, to leave their community when they need mental health services, when they need medical services, when they need to take their kids to school. How can we show up and provide meaningful support, maybe, and even, accompaniment services in the courts? And what training is the coalition able to provide? Where can we do this, and how can we get that service out into the communities where we can make a difference?
Yeah, I think when we were talking about legislation, a big part starts in community members joining coalitions and immigrants' rights organizations when they are advocating for their communities. You're talking about, there's a lot of laws at the city and state level that communities are trying to pass. So the city council, they are broken up into committees. They have a committee on immigration, immigrant rights, and a committee on immigration, and they are working to pass different rules and different pieces of policy. The same at the state level. They have a committee on immigration, and it's just figuring out what piece of legislation the people of New York have to get behind at this local level, but making sure that we're also like pushing on our federally elected officials to actually do something. There's just like a lot of conversation happening when they sit down on Fox and they sit down on NBC and they sit down on CNN, but there's not a lot of action that's happening, and there's not a lot of push. There's a little bit more pushback now, but at first everyone was caught flat-footed, and it was just like the election happened in November, and there wasn't a thought that all of these policies would start getting implemented. So I think it's also holding those actors accountable, because that's our best recourse, because they are actually in the halls of Congress, state assembly, state senate, and city council. Making sure you're supporting organizations like Brooklyn Org, Muslim Community Network, New York Immigration Coalition financially, and especially organizations that provide legal defense. I think those nonprofits have been overwhelmed. The Bronx Defenders, organizations like NILAG, they have very limited capacity to provide legal representation to immigrant communities. So making sure those organizations are financially supported, whether out of your own pocket if you can spare, but then also pushing your city council to support those nonprofits, because those nonprofits do receive funding from city, state, and federal, and making sure like you can push whoever your council member is and say, I need you to support these nonprofits in our district that provide legal representation, that provide advocacy services in the halls of city and state, and making sure those are properly funded in order to fight back, making sure organizations like the ACLU are properly funded through government grants, through your personal pockets, through your employer if you have DAF funds, and making sure those organizations like the ACLU can take cases to the Supreme Court, take cases to federal district courts in order to make sure we're fighting on behalf of our neighbors.
There's also like a lot of it is just showing up. Like I know of multiple court monitoring networks that have sprung up in the city around 26 Federal Plaza. I don't know the names of any of them, but I feel like if someone else here would like to help you out, that would be great. But like if you contact the National Lawyers Guild, they will almost certainly have information for you. There are organizations that are doing accompaniment to ICE check-ins, so that if somebody does get taken into custody, that there's someone there who knows who their emergency contacts are supposed to be and can tell them, hey, this has happened, let's get into, let's mobilize. That's really essential, because otherwise, ICE doesn't put out a weekly statement saying, this week we arrested 800 people showing up at court. In order for us to even know what's going on, we have to have people on the ground. But we've also seen, like, Brad Lander was going because Jews for Racial and Economic Justice has been doing court escorting. So, when things happen, and they're happening to U.S. citizens who are just showing up and showing solidarity, for better or worse, they can get more attention than when it's just happening to immigrants. So I think showing up and being fearless really is something. And there's a real tendency to say, well, I'm myself vulnerable because I have, because there's this other reason why I'm marginalized. And I think that being fearless is so much of a part of allyship that it's just really important to push that aside and say, if people are willing to put themselves on the line to show up, then I'm willing to put myself on the line to show up with them.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I wanted to ask about technology, because I think that's one thing that's incredibly different than past historical periods. Like the just largeness and the expansiveness of the costs, which also creates such a greater fear tamping down on storytelling. And I think narrative is how things change, and the immigration system is incredibly complex and incredibly capricious. And to be able to explain that, it helps, if you're in proximity to it or within it, and to be able to talk about that. But as someone who is in that situation, I don't want to talk about it because I'm terrified that if I'm sending a message or I'm posting something or I'm saying something on the phone, that there's so much technology that's taking away the privacy to even be able to talk about your stories and your experiences.
This is a real fear, and we should have mentioned this as one of the new things. The idea that the IRS and Social Security are sharing files now was unheard of. And I'll give an example. Medicaid. So my daughter is a doctor who works with refugees in Seattle, and she promised for years. She has a clinic with expectant mothers, and for years she said, you're on Medicaid, we'll never turn these records over, and now they're being turned over. She feels, what does she say to people about that? So the sharing of records is really is awful. Even the ankle monitor with what do we call those? The ankle monitors that were initially put in place to get people out of detention, and it was seen as a good thing, as a liberal intervention. You don't have to be in detention anymore. It's really just expanded the scope of detention, because now people are monitored wherever they are and can be found in any place. So I think the technology side here is very scary. The new on the foreign students, the Trump administration said no more foreign students for a while. We're pausing interviews. Now they've put interviews back in place, but the social media on people's phones and laptops will be investigated. And I've heard lots of stories in my business as academics who now have separate computers and phones when they travel, and they leave some home and they take their other phone or buy a burner phone overseas so that stuff can't be monitored. So this is something we don't know enough about, but it's clearly coming, and it is totally new. You're right to raise it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the digital surveillance is extremely scary. There was a case of a lawyer, I believe he was from Dearborn, but he was from somewhere in Michigan, who was pulled by a CBP coming back into the country, and it was because they had monitored his cases and digitally surveilled him and found out that he was working on behalf of people that were protesters and fighting on behalf of Gaza. But that was it. There was no actual reason or suspicion of terror or anything like that. It was that, you are a lawyer that's on the front line of protest movements, and we want to pull you and ask for more questions, and we want you to turn over your phones because you have more data on there that we want to know, and we want to surveil the people that are also in your phones, which they know is protected because he's a lawyer. They're just saying hey, do you want to go enter the country again and visit your family? Give us your phones, or we won't allow that. And I think when we talk about technology is going into a real complex place. I think just reading recently about Palantir, and that has been, as the child of an immigrant, as someone who works for immigrant communities, seeing how the government has such a working relationship with a technology AI company like Palantir, who is able to take in massive amounts of data, and you start thinking about the predictive policing that's going to come out of that, the criminalization that's going to come out of that, the way that the DOD and Homeland Security is going to really be able to track immigrants, track everyone, but immigrants will be tracked because you're going to get data that's fed from the Social Security Administration, from Medicaid records, and it's extremely frightening, the level of privacy that people who say they are for privacy are stomping all over all the privacy rules that have been set in place. And if these relationships with technology and government continues to grow, we won't have any policy at all. It'll definitely become a big brother state.
Yeah, and this will apply to people with green cards as well, not just people who've been arrested. I mean, there's an interesting book that's been written about called The Shifting Border, about how we have borders inside the country. But this technology will sort of produce the border everywhere, right? That we'll always be able to distinguish immigrant from citizen through the use of technology.
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing where citizenship privilege is very real. None of the things that we're describing are levers that they can pull with regard to U.S. citizens. I can, if people want to pull me over at the reception and talk about coming back into the country, I can do that. But if you're a US citizen, there's just so much less they can do to you. And that's where allyship becomes really, really important. Practice good OPSEC, feed information to somebody who can't. If you are not in a position to stand up, feed information to somebody who can. And, if you can stand up, be effing fearless about it.
On the other hand, it's the social media that made the No King's Day possible, right? So.
I would like to thank everybody for being here, for showing up, for listening, and I hope to talk more to you at the reception. And thanks very much to Brooklyn Org and to the BPL.